Well, ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump had a interview that was released last night via Fox News, and there's a lot of statements on the situation with Canada. It is more of the same rhetoric from Trump, calling Canada the 51st state. No real talk yet of possible individual provinces seceding from Canada and joining the United States, which is really what we've been hinting at the past few days. The idea of Alberta, Saskatchewan, the two Republican provinces, depending on what happens with the upcoming election and with the tariffs, seceding and joining the U.S., and in turn, maybe the other provinces, or at least a few of the other provinces, including the Northern Territories, would fall like dominoes to the United States, and you'd be left with maybe a Western Canada that would be controlled by the United States and an Eastern Canada that may collapse depending on whatever Quebec wants to do. We know they've hinted at being independent themselves in the past, but we've got several clips from Trump. It's a lot of the same stuff. Talks about Canada. He also talks about in this upcoming election, he might want the Liberal Party to win. And that's what I was saying even before. It's the idea of, and I'm not sure, he was more so talking about Pierre Poilievre being very critical of Trump. And it's understandable if you are Trump, the dynamic of a liberal versus a conservative in Canada, because the conservative is going to be a lot more Canadian first. The liberal is a little bit different in terms of maybe being kind of a bigger benefactor to the world rather than just Canadians. The Conservative Party in Canada right now is doing the whole Canada First thing. They want to benefit themselves, which is honestly what they should do. But if you're Trump, it's better to have the Liberal in office, which is understandable. And it's also, there might be another underlying thing with Carney if he wins. Alberta and Saskatchewan are going to be very angry. We know Trudeau was a complete failure. They basically forced him out with an approval rating of 16%, real bad stuff. So imagine they, after all of that, they elect another Liberal, and the Liberal Party still has the majority in the Canadian government. But let's see what Trump has to say here.
I deal with every country, indirectly or directly. One of the nastiest countries to deal with is Canada. The people that, now this was Trudeau, the people that good old Justin, I call him Governor Trudeau, his people were nasty. And they weren't telling the truth. They never told the truth. You know that, they'd say, well, we don't charge. Well, they do. They charge tremendous. They charge tremendous. And if you look at dairy products, what they've done to our farmers, I'd go up to Iowa. I'd go up to different places, Nebraska, and they would always complain about Canada, how they get ripped off. Do you know that Canada has a 250% tariff? 250. Nobody knows that. They charge us numbers that are crazy.
Well, yeah, people are starting to realize it because Trump's been talking about it. The dairy products, they say it's to protect their own farmers so the United States doesn't flood their markets. But Trump's right. They have 250 to 270% tariffs on dairy. And just as a bigger picture thing with Trump saying Canada's nasty, look at the way Canada's handled these tariffs versus Mexico. Mexico has been much more cooperative in dealing with these, and they've been able to work things out. And right now, the imports to the United States from Mexico under the North American U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreement are not tariffed. So about 60% of the products coming in from Mexico it's about 60% coming in are not tariffed. Mexico has been a lot nicer. Canada's thrown an entire fit. But you've also got this interview, Laura Ingraham coming out saying, oh, but what if Canada goes to China and starts dealing with them more? China just imposed a tariff on Canada, and now Canada is going to have to do reciprocal. Canada is not in a good spot. And listen, if these tariffs stay on and Trump keeps this rhetoric up, you're going to get Alberta, you're going to get Saskatchewan, you're going to get some of these Republican places becoming very irate with where Canada is going. And you've also got a lot of people, there's a lot of people in Alberta specifically that would be very interested in joining the United States. This could be a huge deal for them if you get, and they talk about, well, what about the universal health care? It's been a complete disaster in Canada, and that can all be worked out. It can be negotiated. But these people are going to be getting a huge windfall, potentially, if it is a one-for-one exchange rate like Trump had signaled in the past. And the idea is you would only take Western Canada. Eastern Canada, we're not exactly sure what would happen to them. Would it still be Canada? Would it dissolve completely? But we don't want the liberal, because the problem is if you do make them the 51st state, it is going to be a liberal state. And you'd think someone would ask Trump, it's just like, let me just ask Trump, let's understand this. This is probably not a good idea. It's about 55 electoral votes. It'd be all liberal. So it'd be very hard for a conservative to win. And then you say, well, maybe they would turn. Yeah, not really. It's very unlikely that Canada, in terms of U.S. conservative, it's just not going to happen. Their conservative party is like center right. It's barely right in comparison to where the United States is.
Here's my problem with Canada. Canada was meant to be the 51st state because we subsidize Canada by $200 billion a year. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We have a lot of lumber. We freed it up, as you know, last week. We're freeing it up so that you can actually cut down a tree without being, given the death penalty. Because what these radical environmentalists have done to our country, but we freed it up. But we don't need their lumber. We don't need their energy. We don't need anything. We certainly don't want their automobiles. They make a lot of millions of automobiles are sent in. I'd rather have them made in Michigan. I'd rather have them made in South Carolina or any one of our.
You're tougher with Canada than you are with some of our biggest adversaries.
Only because it's meant to be our.
Well, it's because we trade with them a ton. Canada and Mexico are our two biggest trading partners, so that's why you would be toughest on them when it comes to tariffs if you want the United States to become self-sufficient. So it just makes sense. But I mean, Trump is pretty tough on Canada, to be fair. The lumber thing, I mean, Canada does have a ton of lumber, and they've got really good wood. The United States, Trump referencing there, being able to cut down trees. We're going to have to, if we don't take lumber from Canada, we are going to have to cut down more trees in the United States to be able. There's also a lot of trees in Alaska. The Alaska lumber businesses would boom if this ends up fully going into place to where we don't take any lumber from Canada. But obviously, Trump, we would be taking lumber from Canada if he gets what he wants, which would be Canada being annexed by the United States. And he's still pushing this. It's very interesting. There's a lot of pressure right now when it comes to Canada, and depending on what happens with these tariffs, I've talked about the different ways it could play out, possibly with Canada saying, we give up, we don't want any tariffs, we will end all of our tariffs on you guys, on the dairy products, on everything that we have, and we're going to give you an even better trade deal that's going to be renegotiated immediately. There's already been rumors that some of the premiers up in Canada want to renegotiate that trade deal that was agreed to in 2020 during Trump's first administration. It was agreed to in the summer, and then it's up for renegotiation in 2026. They're saying, let's do it right now because we can't take these tariffs anymore. As long as Trump keeps them in place, and the tariffs, it's like it's a war in and of itself to try and combat the propaganda, because there's a lot of negative propaganda as it relates to tariffs when it comes to the United States and how it affects the stock market short term, especially. You'll get the tariffs go into place, and then the stock market will tank for a day, and people lose perspective on the overall goal of what tariffs are meant to do and how it's a long-term solution if that's what Trump wants to do. Now, it could be a squeeze to where there's all this pressure. He said before he got into office, during his period to where he won, or right around when he won, when he was president-elect, that he wanted Canada to feel economic pressure. There was not going to be a military invasion into Canada, but he wanted to cripple them in terms of their economy to where they would be first to join the United States. Even with this bullheadedness, it's more so all right, we're getting killed so bad. The United States offers such an amazing deal to us. Also the military protection, because we already do give them military protection. This is North America. It's to a degree, it's the same thing with Mexico as well. These countries are not going to be bullied by any. Also, it's based on where they're located, but they're just not going to be bullied by any foreign power because they know the United States has direct involvement and is also obviously the major player in North America. So you've also got a reporter talking to Carney about him calling Trump. Remember, Carney said he's not going to meet with Trump, and this guy is just completely unqualified. He can barely answer the question.
You will have a call with President Trump in the coming days. What are your expectations for the president in that call?
I think, let me say a few things. The first is that the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Canada, but certainly the President of the United States has many responsibilities, and there are many issues. I can think of many geostrategic issues that the President is helping to lead on, and you can think of events most recently in with respect to the Houthis and all the way through to trade and other aspects. So there's a wide range of issues to be discussed when we do connect. With respect to trade, I look forward to, at the appropriate time, having a discussion as two sovereign nations that is comprehensive, not targeted at one issue.
Maybe they should bring Trudeau back. That struck me as a very unqualified answer. That was really bad, real bad. This is like the biggest issue going on right now with Canada is this tariff trade war with the United States. And he's like, we'll discuss a number of different things, including trade, sovereign nation, comprehensive. I mean, this is really bad, but and you have to wonder, are they really going to elect someone like that? You can see it.
Isn't that going to make them more hostile to us and possibly
I'd rather deal with a liberal than a
for China closer to Canada, and that would really put us in a bind.
The conservative that's running.
But how would China get closer to Canada when they just tariffed them as well? And now China's talking about doing reciprocal tariffs.
Is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. So
he's talking about the conservative leader in Canada.
Is stupidly no friend. The conservative that's running is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. So when he says negative things, I couldn't care less. I think it's easier to deal, actually, with a liberal.
Isn't that going to be?
It is easier to deal with a liberal. Liberals are more open to giving up their own country's wealth for the betterment. And so you would much rather have a liberal in there than a Canadian first conservative, for sure. Absolutely. That's why all the European countries always want liberals to be elected in the United States. And then liberals misinterpret that and say, see, we're liked and respected throughout the world. No, you're just pushovers. You're easier to deal with because you don't have the nationalist America first approach. And so that's why a lot of the Europe countries, and they're also just liberal in general. But when it comes to this, Trump is still putting the heat on Canada. It just depends. What does he want to do with the tariffs? How do the tariffs evolve when it comes to Canada's economic situation getting worse? And does that pressure provinces within Canada to look at seceding? And at what point does Trump start mentioning an Alberta, mentioning a Saskatchewan? Because when you look at some of the eastern provinces, they're very liberal. They're not going to want to join the United States. They're not going to want to join someone like Trump. So you have to wonder, is it more so a Western Canada versus an Eastern Canada type thing, to where Trump now looks maybe towards Western Canada instead of the entire country? Because I've said from the beginning, adding the entire country, yes, it would certainly increase the size of the United States. There are a number of key advantages to that. You've got the Northwest Passage. You've got, if you take Greenland, you've got all of the Arctic above North America, above the Atlantic Ocean, 100%. But the problem is, you're talking about them being a state, they're going to be voting. The other thing that's interesting, and I've heard this, is maybe you just make Western Canada just a territory, and then you talk about the provinces applying for statehood, but you make them a territory at first. Being a territory is very valuable. You get military protection from the United States, and the taxes are amazing. It's a tax haven. Look at Puerto Rico. A lot of rich people moved to Puerto Rico because of the tax situation. They're a U.S. territory. So there are clear advantages to being a territory. Now, if all of Canada was annexed by the United States, it would be hard to justify them as a territory because of the population. Those people would want, I mean, honestly, they might not want, because they wouldn't have to pay the taxes, but you would think they would want the representation to be able to vote in a U.S. election. But I think it might be better to annex the western side. I mean, to me, the upper three territories in Canada are very sparsely populated. I'm not sure they would ever be states. I think they would just remain territories. They're territories in Canada. You've got the three territories and then all of the provinces. So the upper three, which are really connected basically to the Arctic, they're connected to Alaska, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, those would probably stay territories. They wouldn't be states. But then you're looking at, depending on how far east, or how far east you want to go, you'd be looking at Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia maybe staying as a territory. British Columbia being very liberal, being comparable in terms of how liberal they are to Washington State, to Oregon, to California. And then do you push how far east do you push with this? If it is maybe a split up where you split Canada in half, do you potentially take Manitoba or not? I mean, Manitoba's a little bit more liberal, but when it comes to this in general, we'll see how it all develops. Trump is still saying he wants the entire thing. But to me, there's a big variance inside of Canada in terms of how liberal the eastern side is versus the western side. And so that might start changing it a little bit to where Trump says, well, looks like Alberta wants in, Saskatchewan wants in, rather than all of Canada. Because again, you're going to have a voting problem if that ends up happening. And look, maybe all of this is just Trump, because people always say it's just Trump trolling, but at what point is it like, I mean, this is how you would go about doing this. If you wanted to annex a country and destroy them and cripple them in terms of their economic situation, in terms of GDP, Canada is way more reliant on the United States than we are of them. It's a huge difference. And so is Mexico. And that has to do with trade. So if we tariff them and they can tariff us back, it doesn't matter though. They are going to get crushed. Their only hope is that because tariffs initially have a negative impact on both countries, the propaganda will get to the American citizens and the American citizens will lower Trump's approval rating and it'll put pressure on Trump to stop the tariffs. Or this could be a thing to where Trump just wants the tariffs to end in general. Either way, I think Trump is going to come out in a very favorable position in this. The only way he wouldn't would be, I mean, a situation to where the tariffs go on for a long period of time, Canada sticks it out, but even then you're getting the domestic production because the companies would be forced to produce things in the United States, or they would have to pay the tariff, which would generate revenue for the United States, which could then either help cut into the deficit, the debt, or you could potentially end the state income tax or something like that. Or they were talking about possibly if you make under your first $150,000 in the United States not being taxed at all. Now, I'm not sure if they'd be able to do that because of our debt right now. They are trying to do it with the Department of Government Efficiency, change all that stuff, and they are going to save significant money. We know that. There was a lot of bloat in the government, how much they'll be able to save. There's some conflicting reports on how much they've saved right now. I think Musk claims it's like $115 billion total. Other people will say no. It's just contracts that they're manipulating. They really didn't save that much. There's differing numbers, but they are going to be saving money through that. But the point of this is that there still is a big tone from Trump to be aggressive against Canada. He still is saying to the public that he wants Canada to be part of the United States. So what is the solution? Well, maybe Western Canada is annexed, they become territories and then have to apply for statehood. Maybe Alberta starts by seceding from Canada and then voting to join the United States, and then Saskatchewan follows and it becomes a domino effect. And Trump potentially, because he wants control of the Arctic, takes the 3 northern territories or pays for it in a deal with the eastern side of Canada. There's a number of things that can happen here, or it just comes down to the tariffs and there's a negotiation, there's a renegotiation of the 2020 North American trade deal that gives the United States more access to Canadian rare earth minerals, better deals on lumber, along with other things that we trade with them, along with removing the 270% tariffs on dairy that is imported into Canada. U.S. farmers are getting screwed on that because Canada put that in place to quote-unquote protect their own farmers. And which honestly, I think they're probably going to have to do. How are they going to get through this situation? And they're talking about delaying their election. They're like, this is a whole big thing. Yeah, they make it like this is a huge thing, and then Carney can't even answer a question. Sir, you're meeting with Donald Trump. There's massive tariffs. You're delaying the election because of this. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you're going to say? And then Carney's like, Houthis, I mean, it's unbelievable, but this is interesting stuff, and we'll have to see how it continues to develop. Either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.